Hi, welcome to this Corbettmaths video. In this video, we're going to look at the video solutions to the Corbettmaths practice questions on express and as a percentage. If you need any extra help on this topic, if you go to Corbettmaths and go to the videos and worksheets section and scroll down to video number 237, there's a dedicated video tutorial there on express and as percentages. Alternatively, you could scan this QR code. But in this video, we're going to focus on the video solutions to practice questions, so let's get started. Okay, so question number one. Question number one is a non-calculator question, and we're told for every 50 students at Hightown School, 29 are right-handed. And part A, we've been asked to work out 29 as a percentage of 50. Okay, so if I was given a question like this, the first thing I would do is I'd actually write it as a fraction. So we want to write 29 as a percentage of 50. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 29 as a fraction of 50 to begin with. So that would be 29 out of 50, so 29 50ths. So we've now got a fraction, which is out of 50, the denominator is 50. Now that's actually quite a nice question because whenever we want to write something as a percentage, remember percentage means out of 100, percent per 100. So what we want to do is we want to find an equivalent fraction with 100 on the denominator. And to get from 50 to 100, we multiply by 2. So we're going to multiply the numerator by 2 as well. And 29 times 2 would be 58. So that means that 29 out of 50 would be 58 out of 100, which would be 58% because it's out of 100, so it's just going to be 58%, and that's it. And then the question continues. It says that 1,000 students attend Hightown School. So there's 1,000 students at the school, and part B says how many right-handed students attend Hightown School. So we know that 58% of the students, 58% of the students are right-handed, so 50% are right-handed. So we need to work out what 58% of 1,000 is. So there's a few different ways we could do this. One way is we could take 1,000 and then 1,000 divided by 100. Well, to divide by 100, you move the digits 2 columns to the right. So the 1 would move into the hundreds and then into the tens column. So it would be 10. Or another way to do it is if you're doing 1,000 divided by 100, because there's lots of zeros on the end of this number, when we're dividing by 100, we can just take off 2 zeros. So that would be 10. So that's 1%. So that's 1%. And then if we wanted to find 58%, you times by 58. So we take the 10 and we'd multiply that by 58. And 10 times 58 would be 580. So that means that 580 students are right-handed. So the answer is 580, and that's it. So that's one way to do it, to work out 58% of 1,000. Another way to do it would actually be to use our equivalent fractions again. We know that 58 out of 100 students were right-handed. Now we know there was 1,000 students at the school, so if we could change the denominator to be 1,000, we can then work out how many would be right-handed. So to get from 100 to 1,000, you times by 10. So if you just times the numerator by 10, that would be 580 out of 1,000, which again would be 580 right-handed students. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 2. Okay, so question number 2 says, David received £5 from his grandmother. So David's grandmother gives him £5 and he gives £2 to his sister. So that's quite generous of him. And then we're asked to write down £2 as a percentage of £5. So we need to write £2 as a percentage of £5. Now, if I was given a question like this, the first thing I would do is I would write it as a fraction. So it's 2 out of 5, so 2/5. So that means that David gives 2/5 of his money to his sister. Now we need to write 2/5 as a percentage. Now this is a non-calculator question, and actually a fraction like 2/5 you should really know off by heart. You should know that 1/5 is equal to 20%. You should know that off by heart, that a fifth is 20%. So 2/5 would be double that, which would be 40%. So 2/5 is 40%. So that means that £2 as a percentage of £5 would be 40%. So that's one way to do it, is to know it off by heart, that a fifth is 20% and 2/5 is equal to 40%. Now, if you happen to forget that and you need to know how to change 2/5 to a percentage, one way would be to take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. So if we do 2 divided by 5, this will tell us what 2/5 is as a decimal. So how many 5s go into 2? That's going to be 0, remainder 2. And how many 5s go into 20? That's going to be 4. So that means that 2/5 is 0.4, and then to change a decimal to a percentage, you times by 100, so we move the digits 2 columns to the left. So the 4 would move into the ones of the units column, and then again into the tens column, so that would be 40%. So that means that 2/5 would be 40%. So if you're given a fraction that you don't know off by heart, just take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. And then once you do the numerator divided by the denominator, that gives it to you as a decimal. Then you can change the decimal to a percentage by moving the digits 2 columns to the left. So that's the second way you can do this question. And another way you could actually do this question is, well, a percentage means out of 100, we could actually find an equivalent fraction. To get from 5 to 100, you times by 20. So to find this numerator, we times by 20 as well. 2 times 20 is equal to 40. So that means that 2 out of 5, or 2/5, would be equal to 40 out of 100, which is 40%. Now, in terms of the equivalent fraction approach, I'd tend to use this approach whenever we've got quite a nice denominator to begin with. For instance, if it was 50 or 25 or 10 or 5 or 2. Whenever you've got a factor of 10 as the denominator, I would probably use this approach. Alternatively, you could do the numerator divided by the denominator to get as a decimal, and then times by 100 to find out what the percentage would be. Or alternatively, if it's a nice fraction, you could just perhaps know it off by heart. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 3. Okay, so question number 3, we're told that Roger scores 6 out of 8 in a quiz. We've been asked to work out his score as a percentage. So again, this is a quite nice one because 6 out of 8, let's write it as a fraction, 6/8. And 6/8 cancels down. It cancels down to be 3/4 because both the numerator and denominator are divisible by 2. So that means that Roger answered 3/4 of the questions correctly. Now we need to write this as a percentage, and again you should really know this, that 3/4 is equal to 75%. So the answer would be 75%. Alternatively, you could consider equivalent fractions. Instead, to get from 4 to 100, you times by 25. So you times the numerator by 25 as well, and that would give you 75 out of 100. Which is 75%, or you could do the numerator divided by the denominator, which is 0.75, and then times by 100 to get 75, so it'd be 75%. But again, something like 3/4, you should know that one off by heart. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 4. Okay, so question number 4, we're told that Susan brings 500 flapjacks to her local fair, and she sells 450 of them. And the question says, what percentage of the flapjacks did Susan sell? She sold, let's write it as a fraction, out of the 500 flapjacks, she sold 450 of them. So she sold 450 500ths of the flapjacks. Okay, so we've now got it as a fraction. We want to change this now to a percentage. Now, in terms of doing that, there's a few approaches we could use. One approach is to do it in one step. Now, remember, percentage means percent per 100. So we want the denominator to be 100. And to get from 500 to 100, you can divide by 5. So if we divide the numerator by 5, we can then find out what it is out of 100. So we need to do 450 divided by 5. Now 45 divided by 5 is 9. So that means that 450 divided by 5 would be 90. Or you could use the bus shelter method and do 450 divided by 5. How many 5s go into 4? 0 remainder 4. How many 5s go into 45? That's 9. And how many 5s go into 0? That's 0. So that would be 90 out of 100, which would be 90%. So that's one approach. Another approach would be actually if we had 450 out of 500, we can actually divide both of these by 10 to get that's 45 out of 50. And then when you know it's out of 50, you could double them both to get that 45 out of 50. If you double them both, would be equal to 90 out of 100, which is then 90%. So that's another approach that you could use. Alternatively, you could use the bus shelter method and do 450 divided by 500. But I think really finding an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator would be the best approach in this question. Okay, let's look at the next question, question number 5. Okay, so question number 5, we've been asked to write 94 out of 200 as a percentage. That's 94 out of 200. Okay, so it's 94 out of 200. Now we want it to be as a percentage. We've written it as a fraction. Let's now write it as a percentage. And remember that percentage means percent per 100. So we want the denominator to be 100. And to get from 200 to 100, you can divide by 2. So if we divide the numerator by 2, so half of 94 is equal to 47. That's 47 out of 100, which is 47%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 6. So question number 6 says that Colin scores 13 out of 20 in a class test, and we've been asked to work out his mark as a percentage. That's 13 out of 20. So I've written it as a fraction. Now we want to change this mark to a percentage. So to get from 13/20ths to a percentage, well, percent means per 100. So we can actually find an equivalent fraction with 100 on the denominator quite nicely. To get from 20 to 100, we times by 5. So if we times the numerator by 5, if we do 13 times 5, we can find out what it would be as a percentage. So 13 times 5, well, 12 times 5 is 60. So 13 times 5 would be 65. Or you could use your column multiplication there and do 5 times 3 is equal to 15. Put a 5 down, carry a 1. And 5 times 1 is equal to 5 plus 1 is equal to 6. That's 65 out of 100, which is 65%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 7. So question number 7 is a calculator question, and we've been asked to work out 15 as a percentage of 80. So let's write it as a fraction to begin with. So that would be 15/80ths, because it's 15 as a percentage of 80, so 15/80ths as a fraction. Now we want to change this to a percentage. Now it's a calculator question, so what I tend to do is I tend to just take the numerator, 15, and divide by the denominator on my calculator, and that would be equal to, and when I press equals, I get 3/16. And then if I change that to a decimal, I get 0.1875. So I've just changed this fraction, 15/80ths, to a decimal on my calculator by taking the numerator and dividing it by the denominator. So I've done 15 divided by 80 is equal to 0.1875. Now we know what it is as a decimal, 0.1875. I'm going to times that by 100. And when I times that by 100 on my calculator, I get that's equal to, it comes up as 75 over 4, or 18.75. So that means that the decimal, 0.1875, as a percentage would be 18.75%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 8. Okay, question number 8, again, it's another calculator question, and we've been asked to express 126 as a percentage of 360. So let's write it as a fraction to begin with, 126 out of 360, or over 360. And I'm going to change that fraction into a decimal. Now, I tend to just do the numerator divided by the denominator, so I would just do 126 divided by 360 and press equals. That gives me an answer of 7/20, and then whenever I write that as a decimal, that would be 0.35. So I've just taken the numerator and divided it by the denominator. Now another approach would actually be to just type in the fraction 126 over 360, and again you could then just change that to a decimal and get 0.35. So you can actually just type the fraction into the calculator and convert it into a decimal. I would tend to just divide the numerator by the denominator. So that's 0.35. Now to change from that to a percentage, we're going to take the 0.35 times by 100, and that's equal to 35. So that means that 0.35 as a percentage would be 35%. So that's it, we've answered the question. We're asked to express 126 as a percentage of 360. The answer is 35%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 9. So question number 9 says there's 600 people at a football match, and there are 222 children at the match. And we've been asked to write 222 as a fraction, 222 as a fraction of 600, and to give our answer as a percentage. Okay, so I've written it as a fraction. Now we want to get from this fraction to a percentage. So to go from a fraction to a percentage, well, we could divide the numerator by the denominator. Now, I don't really fancy doing 222 divided by 600. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually divide both of these by 6. If we divide the denominator by 6, that'll give us a denominator of 100. And then if we divide the numerator by 6, then we'll find out what it would be out of 100. So that'll be our percentage. So let's try 222 divided by 6. So how many 6's go into 2? 0, remainder 2. How many 6's go into 22? That would be 1, 2, 3 is 18, remainder 4. And how many 6's go into 42? That's 7. So that would be 37 out of 100. And then we've been asked to write as a percentage, that's going to be 37. So that's going to be, because it's 37 out of 100, that's going to be 37%. And that's it. Okay, question number 10. So question number 10, we've been asked to write 42 as a percentage of 64. So let's write it as a fraction to begin with. So that's 42 out of 64. Now, you could just type that into your calculator, but I'm going to just have it 42 divided by 64. And when I press equals, I get that's equal to 0.65625. So that's it as a decimal. Now we're going to take that decimal, 0.65625, and we're going to times that by 100. And when we times that by 100, we get an answer of, move the digits 2 columns to the left, 65.625. So that means that 42/64 as a percentage would be 65.625%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 11. So question number 11, we've got this grid and some of the squares are shaded in, some of them actually half shaded in, and we're told work out the percentage of the grid that is shaded. So in terms of the grid, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 columns and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. So if we do 5 times 4, 5 times 4, that's equal to 20 squares. So there's 20 squares altogether. You could count them if you wanted to, but I just thought I'd save a bit of time there. Okay, so there's 20 squares altogether. So if we were to write what fraction of the grid was shaded, the denominator would be 20 because there's 20 squares, so it's going to be out of 20. Now let's find out how many are shaded in and put that on the numerator, and that'll tell us what fraction of the grid that is shaded. So let's count the number of squares that are shaded. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then we've got a half and another half. Well, these two would join together to then fill up another square. So that would be, I suppose, 16 and a half and 17. So there's going to be 17 out of 20 that are shaded. And then we want to write 17/20. That's the fraction of the grids that's shaded, 17/20. We want to write that as a percentage. So I'm going to find an equivalent fraction with 100 on the denominator. And to get from 20 to 100, we times by 5. So if we times the numerator by 5, we'll then find out what it would be out of 100. And 17 times 5, 5 times 7 is 35, put a 5 down, carry a 3, and 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 is 8, so it's going to be 85 out of 100, which would then be, as a percentage, 85%. So that means that 85% of that grid is shaded, and that's it, so let's write that down, 85%. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 12. So question number 12, we're asked what percentage is 3 centimetres of 16 centimetres? So let's write it as a fraction to begin with. It's going to be 3 out of 16. So 3 as a fraction of 16 would be 3/16. Now we want to change that to a percentage. So again, we could just add that fraction into our calculator if we wanted to, but I would just do 3 divided by 16. And 3 divided by 16 is equal to 0.1875. So that means that 3/16 as a decimal would be 0.1875. So that's it as a decimal, 0.1875. I'm going to times that by 100 now. So I'm going to move those digits 2 columns to the left, so that'll be 18.75. So that means that 3 centimetres as a percentage of 16 centimetres would be 18.75%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 13. Okay, so question number 13, we've been asked to work out 153 as a percentage of 450. So let's write it as a fraction to begin with. 153 out of 450. That's the fraction because we're asked to write 153 as a percentage of 450. So I've written it as a fraction of 450. And then I'm just going to, on my calculator, do 153 divided by 450, and that's equal to 0.34. So that means that 153 out of 450 as a decimal will be 0.34. And then 0.34 as a decimal, if we move those digits 2 columns to the left, so that'd be 34%. So that means that 153 as a percentage of 450 would be 34%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 14. Okay, question number 14 says, Brian buys a car costing £15,000 and he pays a deposit of £6,000. And then we're asked, what is £6,000 as a percentage of £15,000? In other words, what percentage of the price did Brian pay as a deposit? So let's write it as a fraction to begin with. So it's 6,000 out of 15,000. So we've written as a fraction. Now we want to write that as a percentage, which means out of 100, and it's a non-calculator question. So I'm going to find some equivalent fractions which might help us here. So I'm going to start by dividing both of these numbers by 1,000. So if I divide both the numerator and denominator by 1,000, I'm going to get 6,000 divided by 1,000 is 6. And 15,000 divided by 1,000 is 15. So that's 6/15. And actually that can be cancelled down a bit further. Both of those numbers are divisible by 3. So 6 divided by 3 would be 2. And 15 divided by 3 would be 5. So that's 2/5. So as a fraction, it's 2/5. Now we want to write 2/5 as a percentage. And again, I think we had this question earlier on, that 1/5 is equal to 20%, knowing that off by heart. So 2/5 would be equal to 40%. So that means that £6,000 as a percentage of £15,000 would be 40%. And that's it. So in this question, all I done to begin with was I wrote 6,000 as a fraction of 15,000. Then I cancelled that down to get to 2/5. And then I knew that 2/5 as a percentage is 40%. And that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 15. So question number 15 says there's 400 beads in a bag and 140 of the 400 beads are yellow. So there's 400 beads in the bag and 140 of them are yellow. I've been asked to work out 140 as a percentage of 400. Okay, so let's start off by writing it as a fraction. It'll be 140 out of 400. So it's 140 400ths. Now we want to find it as a percentage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel down this fraction. Now actually, rather than cancelling it all the way down, I think it'll cancel down to be something like 7/20ths off the top of my head. But rather than cancelling it all the way down, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel it down until we get something with 100 on the denominator. So as you can see here, to get from 400 to 100, we would divide by 4. And then with the numerator, if we divide the denominator by 4, we're going to have to divide the numerator by 4 as well. So we're going to do 140 divided by 4. So divide by 4, we'll half it and half it again. So half of 140 is 70, and half of that is 35. So that'd be 35 out of 100. Now we could cancel that down more if we wanted to, but remember we want to write this as a percentage. That's 35 out of 100, which would be 35%. And that's it. So in this question, we're asked to write down 140 as a percentage of 400. Well, I started off by writing the fraction, 140 400ths, and then I cancelled down just until I got to 100 on the denominator. And it's quite a nice question where we could just divide the numerator and the denominator by 4. And we got 35 out of 100, which would then be 35%, and that's it. Now, remember, there's also other ways you could do this question. You could, if you wanted to, cancel all the way down to get 7/20ths and then change 7/20ths to a percentage, and that'd be 35%. You could also do 140 divided by 400 using the Bush-Delta method and then change that decimal into a percentage. And yeah, there's a few different approaches, but that's what I would do in that question. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 16. So question number 16 says there's 1,200 homes in a town and 360 of the homes have solar panels. I've been asked to work out what percentage of the homes in the town have solar panels. So let's write down the fraction of the homes that have solar panels. So altogether there's 1,200 homes, and 360 of them have solar panels. So that means that 360 1,200ths of the homes have solar panels. Now we've written it as a fraction, I'm going to cancel that down because that might help us find the percentage. So I'm going to divide both the numerator and denominator by 10 to begin with, so that'll be 36 over 120. Okay, so we've now got 36 over 120. Let's try and cancel down a little bit further. Both of these numbers, 36 and 120, they're divisible by 2. They're both even. They're both divisible by 3, by 4, by 6, by 9, by 12. I'm actually just going to divide them both by 2 to begin with, just pretending that I didn't spot they're both divisible by 12. So if I half them both, I get that's equal to 18 over 60. And let's half again. That's going to be equal to 9 over 30. They're both divisible by 3, so let's divide both the numerator and denominator by 3, and we get that's equal to 3 over 10. And if you just divide them both by 12, you would have got to 3/10 straight away. Okay, so that means that 3/10 of the homes have solar panels. Now 3/10, that's quite a nice fraction, because we know that 1/10 is equal to 10%. So that means that 3/10 would be equal to 30%. So that means that 30% of the homes have solar panels. And that's it. So we wrote it as a fraction, as 360 over 1,200. We cancelled that down to be 3/10, and then I just knew that 3/10 was equal to 30%. Or if you wanted to, you could do 3 divided by 10 is 0.3, and then change that 0.3 to a percentage, so just times by 100 to get 30, so it'd be 30%, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question number 17. So question number 17 is a calculator question, and it says that a hotel had 79 guests and 64 of the guests had breakfast. And we're asked what percentage of the guests had breakfast and to give our answer to 2 decimal places. Okay, so let's write down the fraction of the guests that had breakfast. The 79 guests altogether, so that's going to go into the denominator, and 64 of them had breakfast, so let's put 64 on the numerator. So we now know that 64 79ths of the guests had breakfast. So now let's change this to a decimal. So to change it to a decimal, you could just type it into your calculator as a fraction and then convert that to a decimal. Or I just like to divide the numerator by the denominator, so I would just type 64 divided by 79, and that's equal to 0.81012658 and so on. And the calculator display goes on. Actually, it's a recurring decimal, so it actually goes on forever. But I'm just going to stop there. So we now know that 64 79ths as a decimal would be 0.81012658 and so on. Now we want to change that to a percentage, so let's times that by 100, so that'll be 81.012658 and so on %. And the question said to give our answer to 2 decimal places, so that means it would be 81 point, and then we've got 0, 1, 2, well it's going to be 0, and then we've got 1, 2, we're not going to round up, so it'll just be 1. So that means that 81.01% of the guests had breakfast to 2 decimal places, and that's it. So in this question, what we done was we wrote it as a fraction, we changed the fraction to a decimal, it was a recurring decimal, it went on forever, so we just wrote some of the decimal places, we then changed that to a percentage and rounded it to 2 decimal places like we were told to, and that's it. And just to mention that all the questions so far have been nice percentages. Whenever we've expressed them as a percentage, it's either been a whole number percentage or it's been a decimal that's terminated, that's stopped. But quite often whenever you change fractions to percentages, you're going to get these recurring decimals. You might actually know that from whenever you do class tests, and so your test, if for instance, if the test was out of 23 and you get 19 out of 23, whenever you change that to a percentage, it's not a nice percentage, it's something a bit messier, so you have to do some rounding. Okay, let's look at our next question number 18. So question number 18 says, Mohammed takes penalties for his local football team. So he's got a local football team and he's the penalty taker. And altogether, he's scored 34 penalties and he's missed 6 penalties. And the question says, work out the percentage of penalties that Mohammed has missed. So we're interested in the percentage of penalties that he's missed. Now, the wrong approach to this question, the wrong approach would be to say, well, he missed 6 out of 34. Because he didn't take 34 penalties. He scored 34 and missed 6. So if we do 34 plus 6, that means altogether Mohammed has taken 40 penalties because he scored 34 and missed 6, so he's taken 40 altogether. And it says what percentage of the penalties has he missed? So he's missed 6 out of the 40. So let's write that as a fraction, 6/40. He's missed 6/40 of the penalties. Okay, now we want to write this fraction as a percentage, so let's cancel it down to begin with. Let's divide both the numerator and denominator by 2, so that would be 3/20. So he's missed 3/20 of the penalties. Now we want to change 3/20 to a percentage. If it was a calculator question, I would do 3 divided by 20, which is 0.15, and times by 100 to be 15%. That's what I would do on a calculator paper. On a non-calculator paper, I probably would just find an equivalent fraction. So to get from 20 to 100, we times by 5. So we're going to do 3 times 5, and 3 times 5 is 15, and that is 15%. and that's it. Alternatively, when we got to 3/20ths, we could change that fraction 3/20ths to a decimal. We could do 3 divided by 20, and if we do 3 divided by 20, we would get how many 20s go into 3? 0 remainder 3. How many 20s go into 30? That's 1 remainder 10. And how many 20s go into 100? That's 5. So that means that 3/20ths is 0.15, which is 15%. So Mohammed missed 15% of the penalties. So in this question, I would say the trickiest step would be actually to notice at the beginning that whenever he scored 34 penalties and missed 6 penalties, altogether that's 40 penalties. And that's very important, particularly whenever we write down the fraction of penalties that he's missed. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 19. So question number 19, we're told that James scores 30 out of 90 in a music test. He scored 48 out of 150 in a drama test, and he scored 35 out of 120 in an art test. In which test did James score the highest percentage? And you must show your workings. Okay, so we need to change these scores to percentages. And this is something that you probably do a lot whenever you're in school. If you do a test, you might want to change your score to a percentage. So you're probably quite familiar with this. So James, in his music test, so music. So in music, he scored 30 out of 90. So he 30 out of 90. And to change that fraction to a decimal, I would do the numerator divided by the denominator. So I would do 30 divided by 90. And if you do 30 divided by 90, you get this equal to 0.3333333 and so on, because it's a third. And let's change that to percentage. So let's move the digits 2 columns to the left. Let's times by 100. So that'll be 33.33 and so on percent. So that means that in music, James scored 33.333333 and so on percent. Or some people write it as 33 and a third percent. Okay, so that's what he scored in music. Okay, now let's look at drama. So in drama, James scored 48 out of 150. So let's change that to a decimal to begin with. So let's do 48 divided by 150, and that's equal to 0.32. So that's 0.32, that's a decimal. Let's change it to a percentage. So let's multiply by 100, so that's 32. So that'll be 32%. So in drama, James scored 32%. And then in art, James scored 35 out of 120, so that's 35 out of 120. To change that from a fraction to a decimal, we do 35 divided by 120. That's equal to 0.291666 and so on. So that's going to be, if we change that to a percentage, 29.166 and so on percent. And that's it. So we've got them all as percentages. It said in which test did James scored the highest percentage? So it's going to be music. In music, he scored 33.333 and so on percent. So let's write that down. The answer is music. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 20. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 20. So question number 20 says, Walter sits an exam that has 2 sections. In section 1, he scored 17 out of 20, and in section 2, he scored 41 out of 60. And we're asked, what percentage did Walter score in the exam? Okay, so there's 2 sections, and let's work out the grand total number of marks available. So if we do 20 plus 60, 20 plus 60 is equal to 80. There's 80 available marks. Now let's see how many marks he scored. So he scored 17 in section 1 and 41 in section 2, and if we add them together, we get that's equal to 58. So that means that Walter scored 58 out of 80. So that's the fraction of marks that he scored. Now we want that as a percentage. That's a calculator question, so that's quite nice. So we can just do 58 divided by 80, and that's equal to 0.725. And then that's a decimal. We want that as a percentage. So let's times by 100, so that'll be 72.5, and then we'll put percent. So the answer is 72.5%, and that's it. That's the percentage that Walter scored in the exam. So we just added together the total number of marks available. That's 80. We added up how many marks he scored, 58. We wrote it as a fraction. We changed that fraction to a decimal by doing the numerator divided by the denominator, and then we just changed that to a percentage. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 21. Okay, so question number 21, we're told an airport has 3 car parks, a short stay, a main stay, and a long stay. So there's different car parks for the airport. Some people stay for a very short amount of time, perhaps a few hours, so they might stay in the short stay. The main stay, they might stay for a day or 2, so that's where they may park there. A long stay, if they park perhaps for a week or 2, that's where they may park then. And then we're told in total there's 12,000 spaces in the 3 car parks, so there's 12,000 spaces altogether. 2/5 of the spaces are in the short stay car park. So if we work out 2/5 of 12,000, that'll be how many spaces are in the short stay car park. We're told there's 3,080 spaces in the main stay car park. So there's 3,080 spaces in the main stay car park. And then the question is, what percentage of the spaces at the airport are in the long stay car park? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, to begin with, I'm going to work out how many in the short stay. If we work out 2/5 of 12,000, that'll tell us how many spaces are in the short stay car park. So let's take the 12,000 and let's divide it by 15. And if we do 12,000 divided by 15, that's equal to 800. And then if we do 800 times 2, that's equal to 1,600. So that means there's 1,600 spaces in the short stay car park. Actually, I'm just going to write that down a little bit lower, 1,600. There's 3,080 in the main stay car park, and we're asked what percentage parked in the long stay. So let's work out how many spaces are in the long stay car park to begin with. So let's add together how many spaces are in these two car parks, the short stay and the main stay, and then take it away from 12,000. So 1,600 plus 3,080 would be equal to 4,680. And then if we do 12,000, take away the 4,680, what's left to be how many spaces are in the long stay car park? So 12,000 take away 4,680 is equal to 7,320. Okay, so we now know how many spaces are in the long stay car park. We now need to write that 7,320 as a percentage, because we're asked what percentage of the spaces in the car park in the long stay car park. So let's write it as a fraction. 7,320 out of the 12,000 spaces are in the long stay car park. To get that as a decimal, we'll divide the numerator by the denominator, and that's equal to 0.61, and then as a percentage that would be 61%. So that means that 61% of the spaces at the airport are in the long stay car park, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 22. So question number 22 says, in a jar there's 1,250 red, yellow and pink sweets. There's twice as many yellow as red sweets in the jar, and there's 330 yellow sweets in the jar. And then the question says, what percentage of the sweets in the jar are pink? Okay, so there's 320 yellow sweets in the jar. And then we're told there's twice as many yellow than red. So if we divide this by 2, if we do 330 divided by 2, that's equal to 165. So that means there's 165 red sweets in the jar. We could say there's twice as many yellow than red. We're told there's 330 yellow. So if we divide that by 2, we know there's 165 red sweets in the jar. Okay, we then ask what percentage of the sweets in the jar are pink. So we want to find out how many pink sweets there are. So we know how many are red, we know how many are yellow, and if we know the grand total, we can add these together and take them away from 1,250. So let's do that. 330 plus 165 is equal to 495, so 495. And then if we take the 1,250 and subtract 495, that's equal to how many pink sweets there are. So 1250 subtract 495 is equal to 755. So the 755 pink sweets in the jar. Now we're asked what percentage of the sweets are pink. So that's 755 out of 1,250. And if we divide 755 by 1,250, that's equal to 0.604. So if we change that decimal to a percentage, move the digits 2 columns to the left, that'll be 60.4%. So that means that 60.4% of the sweets in the jar are pink. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 23. So question number 23 says, Lexi sits a maths test, and the test has 40 questions, and a student needs to answer at least 60% in order to pass the test. So they need to score at least 60%. And the question says, Lexi passes the test, so that means she's scored at least 60%, and she noticed that the number of correct answers is a prime number, so she scored a prime number correct. And then it says that Lexi scored Y percentage in the test. Write down a possible value of Y. Okay, so let's start off by finding out how many marks she had to get to pass the test. So it says that you need to score at least 60% correct. So let's work out what 60% of 40 is. So to find 60% of 40, well, let's take 40 and divide it by 10 to find 10%. And 40 divided by 10 is 4. So that means that 10% is 4. Now we want 60%, so we're going to take the 4 and times it by 6. And 4 times 6 is 24. So that means that 60% is 24 marks. So that means that a student needs to score at least 24 marks in order to pass the test. Okay, so you need to score 24, 25 and so on. Now, Lexi passed the test, fantastic, and she noticed that the number of correct answers that she scored is a prime number. So we need to consider the prime numbers between 24 and 40, because they're the possible scores that she may have got whenever she had done the test. Okay, so let's consider our prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. Okay, so all of these are too low. 23, it's still too low. Okay, and next one, 29 would be the next prime number. It's only divisible by 1 on itself. Remember, prime numbers are numbers that you can only divide by 1 on itself. 30, no. 31, yep, could be 31. 32, well, let's not consider any more even numbers. 33, no, it's in the 3 times tables and 11 times tables. 35, no, 5 times tables. 37, yeah. And 39, no, because that's in the 3 times tables as well. So in terms of the scores that Lexi could have scored, she could have scored 29, 31 and 37. So they're the possible number of marks that she could have got in the test. Now we're told that she scored Y% in the test, so we need to change these scores to percentages, and then we need to write down one of them as a possible value for Y. Okay, I'm going to do all of them because obviously you may have done any of these, but we just need to do one of them because it's write down a possible value for Y. We just need to either write 29 out of 40 or 31 out of 40 or 37 out of 40 as a percentage. And if you chose either any of them, that's fine, but I'm going to do all 3 now just because obviously there's 3 possible answers. So 29 out of 40, if we divide the numerator by the denominator, and it's a calculator question, so 29 divided by 40 is equal to 0.725, and as a percentage that'll be 72.5%. So that's one possible score that you could have written down, 72.5. Okay, our next one would be 31 out of 40, and if we do 31 divided by 40, that's equal to 0.775. So as a percentage, that'll be 77.5%. So that's another score that she could have got, 77.5. Or finally, 37. So 37 out of 40. And if we do 37 divided by 40, we get that's equal to 0.925. So it's going to be 92.5%. So that means that 92.5 is another possible answer. So write down a possible value for Y. You just need to choose one of those answers, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 24. Okay, so question number 24, we're told that the price of an air fryer is £160 and in a sale it's decreased by £28. And we've been asked to work out the decrease as a percentage of the original price. So let's write it as a fraction to begin with, a fraction of the original price. So the decrease is £28 and the original price is £160. So in terms of the decrease as a fraction of the original price, it would be 28 out of 160. Now we want to write it as a percentage, we need to change this to a percentage. No, it's a non-calculator question. Now at this point, I don't fancy doing 28 divided by 160 using the bus shelter method, so I'm going to cancel this down a little bit to begin with. Okay, now both of these numbers, the numerator and the denominator, we could divide them by 2 or by 4. I'm going to divide by 4 here. I can divide both the numerator and denominator by 4. So the numerator divided by 4 would be 7, and the denominator divided by 4 would be 40, so 7/40. And now I'm going to change that to a decimal. So I'm going to do 7 divided by 40 using the bus shelter method, okay? And then once I do 7 divided by 40, I'll then know what 28 out of 160 is as a decimal, and then I can write that as a percentage. So how many 40s go into 7? 0 remainder 7. How many 40s go into 70? That'd be 1 remainder 30. Actually, I need to carry on the bus shelter a little bit here. How many 40s go into 300? That'll be 7 is 280, remainder 20. And how many 40s go into 200? That's going to be 5. So that means that 28 over 160 is equal to 0.175. So that we now know as a decimal, let's change that to a percentage. That'll be 17.5%. Just times them by 100, moving those digits 2 columns to the left. So 17.5%, that's the decrease as a percentage of the original price. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 25. Okay, question number 25. Question number 25, it says the price of cinema ticket is reduced from £8 to £7.50. And we've been asked to calculate the reduction as a percentage of the original price. Okay, so the reduction is 50p, where it goes from £8 to £7.50. I'm going to work in pence here, so I'm going to do 50p divided by, and then in terms of the original price, so that's the reduction as a fraction of the original price, 50p out of 800 pence. Okay, so we want to now change that 58 hundredths into a percentage. There's a few different approaches that we could use here. I'm going to cancel that out a little bit to begin with. I'm going to divide both the numerator and denominator by 10. So that'll be 5/80. Okay, so we're now got 5/80. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the bus shelter method. I'm going to do 5 divided by 80. So I'm going to do 5 divided by 80 and see what we get. Okay, so I've just put a 5 down and some zeros and 80, and I've done quite a few zeros because I know that whenever we do 5 divided by 80, it's going to be a decimal number. Now we'll have a few decimal places. So how many 80s go into 5? 0 remainder 5. Okay, how many 80s go into 50? That's going to be 0 remainder 50. How many 80s go into 500? I'm just going to list the multiples of 80 down here. So they're the 8 times tables, but followed with a 0. So 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 40, 48, 50, 6, 64, 72, 8 and 80. They're the multiples of 8. I'm just going to put zeros on. Now they're the multiples of 80. Okay, so 500, that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. remainder 20. How many 80s go into 200? That's going to be 2, remainder 40. How many 80s go into 400? That's 5. So we now know that 58 hundredths is equal to 0.0625 as a decimal. Now we want that as a percentage, so we're going to multiply by hundreds. That means we move the digits 2 columns to the left. So the 6 will move into the units, so the ones column. The 2 will move into the tenths, and the 5 will move into the hundredths. So that'll be 6.25. So it's going to be 6.25%, and that's it. Okay, let's look at our next question, question number 26. Okay, question number 26, we've been asked to work out 150 as a percentage of 60. So sometimes whenever we're expressing as a percentage, the percentage can be bigger than 100%. So here we've been asked to express 150 as a percentage of 600. Well, because what we're expressing is bigger than what we're expressing as a percentage out of, it's going to be bigger than 100%. So let's do that. So let's write it as a fraction, 150 out of 60. Okay, so we've expressed it as a fraction. I'm actually just going to simplify this to get 15 sixths. And now I'm going to do 15 divided by 6. And if I do 15 divided by 6, I'll find out what 150 out of 60 is. Okay, and that's equal to 15 sixths. Now we want to write this as a decimal, so let's do 15 divided by 6. So 15 divided by 6. So how many 6s go into 1? 0, remainder 1. How many 6s go into 15? That's 2, remainder 3. How many 6s go into 30? That's 5. So that means that 150 out of 60 is equal to 2.5. Now we want that as a percentage, so we're going to times by 100, so that means we move the digits 2 columns to the left, so it'll be 250. So the answer is 250%, and that's it. So 150 as a percentage of 60 is equal to 250, because it's 250% of it. And actually, let's just check that. 100% is 60, another 100% is going to be another 60, so that's 120. 50% is 30, and if you do 120 plus 30, that's 150. So 250% of this number is 150, and that's it. Okay, and let's look at our next question, question number 27. So question number 27, win 11/20ths of their matches, and the team draw a quarter of their matches, and then we're told the team lose the rest of their matches. And the question is work out the percentage of their matches the hockey team lose. Okay, so in terms of this question, we know the fraction of the matches that the team win and the fraction of the matches that the team draw. If we add those two fractions together, we'll find the total fraction of the matches that the hockey team win or draw. Then that means that the rest of them will then have to be the fraction of the matches that they lose. Once we know that fraction, we can then write that fraction as a percentage. Okay, so let's add together the two fractions we've been given. Now, this is a non-calculator question, so we're going to need to do this and add these two fractions together using our pen and paper, so not using a calculator. So 11/20ths plus 1/4. So to add together fractions like this, where we've got different denominators, we need to make the two fractions have the same denominator. So the denominator of this fraction is 20, and the denominator of this fraction is 4. So we want to get a common denominator. I'm thinking 20, if we times both the numerator and denominator of this fraction by 5, we'll get that's over 20. So let's do that. So we've got 11/20ths, we're going to keep that one the same, plus, and we're going to times both the numerator and denominator of this fraction by 5. So 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 4 is 20. So a quarter is 5/20ths. Now we just need to add them together. 11/20ths plus 5/20ths will be 16/20ths. So that means that the team win or draw 16/20ths of their matches. So that means the rest of their matches, the 4/20ths, so if we take this away from 1, and the reason I'm saying 1 is if you add together the fraction of the matches that the team win, the fraction of the matches that the team draw, and the fraction of the matches that the team lose, they all need to add together to be 1, because the team can either win, lose, or draw their matches. So whenever you add the fractions together, you're going to get 1. So if we do 1 take away 16/20ths, that'll tell us the fraction of the matches that the team lose. So 1 take away 16/20ths. Now 1 is 20/20ths. If you have a cake, you can cut it into 20ths. So that'll be 20/20ths take away 16/20ths. And 20/20ths take away 16/20ths would be 4/20ths. Now some students may have just added together these two fractions, got 16/20ths and said, well, that means that the rest of them would be 4/20ths, and you could go straight from the 16/20ths to 4/20ths if you wish. Okay, so we now know that the team lose 4/20ths of their matches. So we want to change this to a percentage, because we want to write down the percentage of the matches that the hockey team lose. There's a few different ways we could do this. One approach is to cancel down the fraction, 4/20ths, and if we cancel that down, we'd get 2/10, and then divide both of them by 2 again, we get 1/5. And 1/5 as a percentage would be 20%. We talked about that earlier, that a fifth is 20%. So that means that they lose 20% of their matches. Another approach would be if we had 4/20ths and we want to write that as a percentage, we want to find an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100, and to get from 20 to 100, you times by 5. So if we times the numerator by 5, 4 times 5 is equal to 20. So that'll be 20 out of 100 or 20%. And that's it. So what percentage of the matches did the team lose? The answer is 20%. Okay, and let's look at our last question, question number 28. So question number 28 says the population of a country is 2.85 times 10 to the power of 6. So the population's been given to us in standard form. It's in standard form because we've got a number between 1 and 10 that's bigger than or equal to 1, but less than 10, times 10 to a certain power. So the population's in standard form. And we know the population of the country, and the number of people that own a rabbit in this country is 1.24 times 10 to the power of 5. And the question says calculate the percentage of the population that own a rabbit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it as a fraction. So I know that the total number of people in the country is 2.85 times 10 to the power of 6. Now we could, if we wanted to, write that out in full, and that would be, if we move the digits 6 columns to the left, it would be 285. We moved them twice, so we need to move them over 4 times, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So the population of the country is 2,850,000, but I would tend to, because it's a calculator question, I'm just going to leave it in standard form. So we now know the denominator of the fraction, this is the total population of the country. We want to find the percentage of the population that own a rabbit, so let's write the number of people that own a rabbit on the numerator. That would be 1.24 times 10 to the power of 5. Again, you could write it as an ordinary number. We can move these digits 5 columns to the left, so that's moving them 2 columns to the left, so 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3. So that means that 124,000 people own a rabbit in this country out of the 2,850,000 people. Now, because it's a calculator question, I'm going to just type this into my calculator. On the numerator, I'm going to type in 1.24, then the standard form button, and then 5, and then on the denominator, 2.85. The standard form button, and 6. And then that gives me, whenever I type that into the calculator, it comes up as 62 over 1,425. So that's what it comes up as on the calculator display, so it's cancelled it down for us. Now we want it as a percentage, so I'm just going to change it to a decimal on my calculator. So it comes up as 0.04350877719 and so on. So that's it as a decimal. We now want to change that to a percentage, so we're just going to move the digits 2 columns to the left. So the 4 will move into the tenths and then into the 1, so it's going to be 4 point, and then 350877719 and so on. And then that means our answer will be 4.35% to 2 decimal places. And that's it. That's the percentage of the population that own a rabbit. And that's it. So these have been the video solutions to the Corbettmaths Practice Questions on expressing as a percentage. I really hope you found this video useful. If you have found it useful, please like and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you need any extra help on this topic, if you scan the QR code, it'll bring you straight to the video tutorial on expressing as a percentage. Alternatively, go to Corbettmaths, go to the videos and worksheet section and scroll down to video number 237. And that's it. So I really hope you found this video useful. And again, if you have found it useful, please like and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.